Have you ever wondered what really happened to the cradle of humanity? Why was Africa, the stage for the first great civilizations, erased from history books, relegated to a footnote? What if I told you that the secrets about the origin of our faith, our morality, and even our science were deliberately hidden in the sands of a vast spiritual empire? Prepare yourself. We are about to unravel a mystery that shakes the foundations of the history you know. This is not a lesson, it is an ancient revelation. We will delve into the time when Africa was the spiritual center of the world, exploring the hidden routes of the gods, the lost codes of justice, and the power of the queens who ruled the Nile. The central theme is human consciousness itself, born from none, the primordial waters. What did the ancient priests know about the soul and the universe that was so dangerous that it had to be burned in the Great Library? The revelation is that our search for balance and justice today is, in fact, an echo of the Ma'at law from thousands of years ago. What was lost was not just knowledge, it was the key to understanding ourselves. Before we continue on this journey of awakening, if you feel that flame of curiosity igniting, now is the time to subscribe to the channel, leave your like so that this story reaches more hearts, and please comment on which part of the world you are hearing this prophecy returning from the past from. Darkness concealed the truth. Now the shadows rise. Official history, the one written by the victors, has always painted Africa as a blank page, a continent waiting to be discovered, but this view is a veil, a deliberate deception. In fact, what lay hidden was not emptiness, but rather the secret that, in immemorial ages, Africa was not a periphery, but the very spiritual heart of the known world. Many wonder why such advanced civilizations, cradles of profound knowledge, seem to have disappeared from the map of global history, and the answer lies in a conflict that transcends time, a dispute over the true origin of faith. Imagine, for a moment, a time when the stars were mapped not for navigation, but for connection with the divine, and moral law was the foundation of every society. This was the reality of a vast empire of knowledge, where the sacred and the everyday intertwined in a tapestry of mystery and wisdom. The silence imposed on this period is not merely forgetfulness. It is an act of deliberate concealment, an attempt to erase the original sources of human spirituality in order to create new narratives of power. The time has come to tear away this veil and understand that what was hidden was not just kingdoms and riches, but the key to understanding the foundation of many modern beliefs. This journey will take us to the banks of sacred rivers, to temples of sand, and to the words whispered by ancestral sages, where the concept of God and gods was as vast as the African sky itself. The greatest mystery of Africa is not what it hid, but what the world chose to forget about it. A truth that defies centuries of indoctrination. It all begins, curiously, with water, with the currents that gave life to empires and that still carry the echoes of the first prayer made on the planet. But the exact location and name of this cradle of civilization are the first pieces of a complex puzzle. What was lost in this historical erasure was not just information, but the original meaning of concepts such as justice, order, and eternity itself. Yet traces of this glorious past still pulsate beneath the sands and in the memory of the people. When we speak of spiritual cradles, it is impossible not to bow to the power of Kemet and Kush, vast empires bathed by the Nile, which stretched like the backbone of ancestral knowledge. These were not merely kingdoms with imposing pyramids, they were schools of mysteries, where the sacred river was not only a source of life, but the very metaphor of eternity and constant renewal. For them, geography was intrinsically linked to the cosmos, and each stone and bend of the Nile held a secret about the universe. This axis, Kemet to the north and Kush to the south, in present-day Nubia, formed a continuous current of theological wisdom, exchanging and preserving rituals and texts that would serve as the basis for many later religions. It was a world where kings were more than political leaders. They were divine mediators, and knowledge was transmitted in secret, by word of mouth, to those deemed ready to bear the weight of truth. The power of these kingdoms was so great that their legacy inspired and terrified the invaders who would come centuries later. The great mystery surrounding Kemet and Kush is how the magnitude of their knowledge and the sophistication of their spirituality have been so conveniently minimized by Western history. They not only built lasting monuments, but created a complex ethical and moral system that valued cosmic harmony above all else, an ideal that, frankly, seems to have been lost. This profound knowledge of order and balance was called Ma'at. The Nile, in turn, functioned as the divine clock itself, with its floods and ebbs teaching people the cycle of death and rebirth, reflecting the central myth of Osiris and Isis. This cyclical understanding of existence is a powerful knowledge that spread through trade routes, but also through spiritual and secret paths. Thus, while we focus on the stones and the gold, the true treasure of these territories remains the philosophy of eternity that they codified, a knowledge that springs from Nun, the primordial waters, and leads us to the next piece of the puzzle. Before any desert, temple, or pyramid, there was only Nun, the primordial ocean of darkness and chaos, an African concept that creation arose from an aquatic and infinite void. It is in this cosmic womb that the true beginning is found, the mythical origin of all that we know and of the first God, the one who emerged from undifferentiation to give form to the world. This is not just a legend, it is a powerful metaphor for consciousness manifesting itself. The story goes that from Nun arose Adam, or in some traditions, Ta, the self-generated being, who rose upon Benben, the first mound of earth to emerge from the water, symbolizing the awakening of matter. This solitary ascension is the representation of the first order arising from chaos, an act of divine will that is the ancestor of countless creation narratives across the planet. It is fascinating to note how this myth of the initial water echoes in sacred texts that would come much later. That's where the mystery lies. African cosmogony is not simplistic. It's a complex system that describes divine emanation in detail, with gods emerging from one another in cascades of power and knowledge. They saw the universe as a cycle of expansion and return, where the Creator was present in all His creations, an idea of spiritual unity that is fundamental to understanding all of African spirituality. What we have been taught is only the tip of the iceberg, for the deepest knowledge about Adam and Nun was reserved for initiated priests, who understood the secret language behind the hieroglyphs and rituals. They knew that this origin story was, in fact, a manual on how to manifest one's own reality from personal chaos. This idea of a primordial deity that manifests itself through the sun and creates the world with sound and word is an ancient revelation, and it leads us directly to the ethical principle that this first creation established for humanity. If Nun was primordial chaos, the cult of Ma'at was the established order, the immutable principle that governed not only society but the universe itself, being the cornerstone of all ancestral African morality. Ma'at was not just a goddess. She was a universal concept of truth, justice, balance, and cosmic harmony, an ideal so vital that the pharaohs swore by it. The mystery of Ma'at lies in its daily application. This force was humanity's oldest and most profound code of conduct, long before any 10 Commandments. Imagine a system where every act, every word, and even every thought was measured against the weight of cosmic truth, and not just by human laws. That was the intensity of life under the watchful gaze of Ma'at. It's chilling to think of the level of individual responsibility that this demanded. In the temples, worship was constant, and the priests taught that maintaining Ma'at was to ensure that the sun would continue to rise and the Nile would continue to flow, showing that the fate of the cosmos depended on human ethics. The feather of truth, which was the symbol of Ma'at, appears in the most important rituals, including the judgment of the soul in the afterlife. What has been hidden about Ma'at is that it wasn't a religion, but a philosophy of life that gave meaning and purpose, and its impact extends far beyond the borders of Kemet. It's a powerful teaching on how to live in harmony with the rhythm of nature, a wisdom that was unfortunately lost when human greed overshadowed cosmic harmony. This relentless pursuit of spiritual and social balance naturally leads us beyond the Nile, following ancestral routes where this and other divine wisdom spread, carried by other forces of nature and spirit. If spirituality was the heart of Africa, then the routes of the Orishas and Vodans were its veins, pulsing life and beliefs far beyond the banks of the Nile, extending throughout West Africa. These are not mere gods, you see? They are forces of nature manifested, living archetypes that represent the elements, the paths of destiny, and the mysteries of human self-knowledge. The great secret behind these deities is that they function as a detailed map of the psyche and the cosmos, teaching that the divine is not distant, but rather within the rain, the thunder, and the dense forest. Each Orisha or Vodun governs an aspect of life, an initiatory path, and understanding their stories is the same as unlocking the operating manual of the human soul, a profound and practical knowledge. This ancestral spiritual network was not confined to a single temple. It traveled with the people. It was the invisible baggage of merchants and migrants, the secret code that united different ethnic groups under a shared respect for Mother Nature. Rituals and chants were born in the savannas and adapted to new territories, maintaining the primordial essence of the power of the elements. What has been erased from our understanding of this mythology is that it offers a holistic worldview, where illness is not merely physical, but an imbalance between the individual and nature or ancestors. This spiritual medicine was the foundation of their communities, a knowledge that colonization attempted to crush, but which stubbornly survived. This spiritual force that travels and transforms, resisting oblivion, leads us directly to the center of hidden power, the guardians of this knowledge, the priests who kept the sacred fire burning in the shadows. In the imposing temples of Karnak and Luxor, true power did not reside in the hands of the pharaoh, but rather was guarded by the mystery of the priests of Ammonius, the guardians of an esoteric wisdom that defined the destiny of Kemet. Ammonius, the Hidden One, was the invisible deity of the air, and his priests were the unseen architects of social and spiritual order. What makes these priests so enigmatic is their profound initiation into the secrets of the universe, which went far beyond simple worship, involving astronomy, mathematics, and the engineering of consciousness. They understood that the temple was a representation of the cosmos and that each ritual was a reenactment of creation, a way of maintaining the connection between heaven and earth. This hidden wisdom could not be accessed by just anyone. It was forbidden knowledge zealously guarded in secret chambers and coded texts, reserved only for those who demonstrated purity and devotion to Ma. They wielded colossal influence, capable of dictating policies and even challenging pharaohs, because they held a monopoly on communication with the divine. The conflict arose when the power of these priests became so great that it threatened the throne, leading to attempts at religious reform that, ironically, ended up spreading some of this veiled knowledge beyond the borders. But even dispersed, the core of this knowledge about the occult remained an ancient secret. And it is precisely this key to communication with the realm beyond matter, which the priests mastered, that leads us to the soul's final journey, revealing what Kemet taught about life after death. For the ancient Africans, death was not the end, but the great initiation, a complex journey through the Duat, the underworld full of challenges and revelations, a path detailed in the so-called Book of the Dead. This was not a book in the modern sense, but rather a collection of sacred formulas and spells intended to guide the soul, or the Ba and Ka, through dangers to eternity. The essence of this hidden knowledge is that spiritual merit was the only passport to paradise, and the soul needed to prove its purity in the Hall of Two Truths, where its heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. This judgment was not about whom you worshipped, but about how you lived and maintained cosmic order. This journey through the Duat is filled with powerful mental images, from rivers of fire to gates guarded by demons, a spiritual roadmap that the soul should know by heart so as not to get lost in the darkness. The Book of the Dead was, in fact, a guide to spiritual survival, teaching the soul to transform itself and confront its own shadows. What is fascinating and often forgotten is the conflict of knowledge. This sacred text profoundly influenced the concept of final judgment and eternal life in various later cultures, but the original depth of individual responsibility has been simplified or distorted over time. The secret was, you were your own savior. This belief in the persistence of the soul and the need for ritualistic preparation shows us that Kemet's legacy lies not only in its stones, but in the symbolic codes they use to map the invisible, codes that hold even greater mysteries. Ancient Africa spoke a language that transcends words, encoded in sacred symbols that were, in fact, master keys to unlocking the secrets of the universe and existence. The Ankh, for example, is not just a cross with a handle, it is the breath of eternal life, the union of the masculine and the feminine, and the promise of immortality, an icon of immeasurable spiritual power. Another profound mystery lies in the Djed pillar, which many see as an inert column, but which actually represents the stability of Osiris, the very backbone of order and permanence after death, being used in rituals to reinforce cosmic balance. They understood that geometry and form contained divine energy. And then we have the Eye of Horus, perhaps the best known, but the least understood, not only as a protective amulet, but also as a mathematical and medicinal symbol representing perfection and the restoration of integrity, both physical and spiritual. Just look at the irony. What is used today for pop mysticism was, for them, sacred science of the highest level. What has been concealed is that these symbols were not mere drawings. They were modifiers of reality, focal points for rituals and meditations aimed at aligning the individual with the laws of Maya. In their simplicity, they hold the key to knowledge about the flow of energy and consciousness. This wisdom, that healing begins in the spirit and that the body is merely a reflection of cosmic imbalance, leads us directly to health practices that were intimately linked to the sacred. For ancient African cultures, illness was never seen as an isolated event of the body. It was a sign of disharmony, a rupture in the sacred bond that unites the individual, the community, the ancestors, and nature itself. Ancestral spiritual medicine did not merely treat the physical symptom. It sought the cosmic root of the problem, often linked to an imbalance with Ma'at or a neglect of respect for elders. Healers and shamans were, in fact, spiritual bridges, capable of traveling between the visible and invisible worlds to diagnose the hidden cause of suffering. They used sacred herbs, purification rituals, and, above all, a deep connection with the realm of the ancestors, asking for guidance and healing power to restore the vital flow. The great mystery surrounding this practice is the surprising effectiveness of its methods, which combined a vast knowledge of natural pharmacopoeia with an advanced understanding of the mind and spirit. Ritual, chanting, and symbolism acted as an emotional catalyst, mobilizing the patient's faith and self-healing power. What they tried to erase about this medicine is that it was the ultimate expression of African wisdom in action, proving that the body is inseparable from the spirit and that healing is an act of communal and cosmic reintegration. This holistic approach to the human being challenges the fragmentation of modern knowledge. However, this light of wisdom began to face the invasion of shadows, a turning point in history that jeopardized this entire spiritual heritage and initiated the Great Forgetting. The cosmic peace established by Ma'at and the spiritual robustness of the ancestral realms were not immune to the greed and ignorance that, like a tide of fire, swept across the continent, marking the invasion of the shadows. This was the painful moment when knowledge began to be actively distorted, burned, or hidden beneath the sands, an act of war not only against the flesh, but against memory and faith. The conflict was not merely one of swords, it was a war of narratives, where the invader sought to impose his own worldview, labeling African gods and rituals as primitive or demonic, transforming ancestral wisdom into superstition to be eradicated. Thus, the priests had to become secret guardians, hiding texts and symbols in inaccessible locations. The saddest aspect of this period is the rupture of the thread of continuity, where entire generations were prevented from receiving the complete transmission of ancestral knowledge, forcing wisdom to survive in fragments, in disguised songs and practices, like a code whispered in the darkness. The imposed silence was the most powerful weapon against history. What was lost with this forced forgetting was the understanding of the interconnection between Africa and the ancient world, because by erasing the center, the invader tried to make it seem that knowledge had originated elsewhere, in an attempt to appropriate the original source of spirituality. This pain of forgetting, however, could not completely stifle the truth, and it is precisely in the forbidden connections that the trace of this African influence resurfaces, challenging the official versions of the sacred books. Official history insists on keeping sacred narratives isolated, But by investigating the forbidden connections, we realize that the Nile River subtly runs through many pages of the Bible and other ancient texts. The legend of Moses, for example, cannot be entirely separated from the powerful and complex influence of Kemet, where he would have been not only raised but initiated into the mysteries of the priests of Ammonius. The great mystery here is that many of the laws, symbols, and theological concepts we find in the Torah and other scriptures, such as God's judgment or the structure of the tabernacle, bear striking parallels to the rituals, cosmogony, and moral principles of Ma'at, developed centuries earlier in Africa. This is not a coincidence. It is proof of direct heritage and influence. It is fascinating to trace how the concept of a single God, or the emphasis on divine justice, may have been filtered and adapted from the solar monotheism of Aten, introduced by Akhenaten, which in turn was embedded in the context of Kemet's theology. What has been obscured is that the cradle of monotheistic faith has deep and complex roots in African soil. This revelation challenges centuries of indoctrination that have attempted to separate Western religious history from its ancestral African source, transforming Africa into a mere stage, and not the spiritual school where great leaders and prophets received their initial training. The power of this connection is undeniable, and its trail extends far beyond the Nile. And it is in this wake that we need to delve deeper, looking at other centers of power and knowledge, such as the legendary kingdom to the south, which demonstrated female strength as the mainstay of spirituality and politics. While Kemet declined, spiritual and political power was re-established to the south, in legendary Meroe, the heart of the kingdom of Kush, a civilization that shone brightly and became known as the City of Queens. There, power was not solely masculine. It was ruled by the Kandakes, warrior queens, and spiritual rulers who maintained order and connection with the gods. The mystery of Meroe lies in how female power was the backbone of the state, challenging the patriarchal structure imposed by many neighboring cultures, and showing that ancestral African spirituality valued the balance of forces. These Kandakes were not merely consorts. They were military leaders and religious figures, the living embodiment of the goddess's power. They were often depicted crushing their enemies on imposing monuments, symbolizing the unwavering resistance and sovereignty of the nation, a testament to the respect and reverence society had for female authority. Just look, a real example of how the strength of the mother can be the greatest protector of the people. What has been hidden about Meroe is that it served as a beacon of African autonomy for centuries, preserving the culture, writing, and traditions that Kemet had originated, and proving that ancestral wisdom flourished even under foreign pressure. The silence surrounding the Kandakes is a silence about power. But not even the power of these queens could save the entirety of African knowledge, and much of this vast and global knowledge was lost in a catastrophic event that forever changed the history of humanity. When we think of lost knowledge, our minds inevitably turn to the Great Library of Alexandria in Egypt, which, although built under Hellenistic influence, housed a treasure trove of African wisdom collected from Kemet, Kush, and other civilizations. The burning of this library was not just the loss of books, it was the destruction of centuries of history, science, and ancestral spirituality. The mystery here is not whether it burned, but what exactly was burned and what the powerful of the time wanted to prevent from being read. It is estimated that millions of papyri detailed African cosmogony, esoteric rituals, mathematical discoveries, and global connections that would have rewritten the entire history of humanity, but the fire consumed the truth. The loss is irreparable. Imagine the treatises of Ma'at, the secrets of the priests of Ammonius, and the evidence of African influence on Greek philosophy, all reduced to ashes. What remains are only fragments and biased translations, forcing future generations to reconstruct the past with incomplete pieces. What has been concealed about this event is that it allowed for the strategic erasure of Africa as the primary source of knowledge, giving space for other cultures to declare themselves the cradle of civilization without historical challenge. The fire of Alexandria was the beginning of the great silence surrounding African wisdom. However, this wisdom did not become completely extinct. It was forced to travel and hide, finding a new home and a new form of resistance in one of the darkest periods of human history. At the height of horror and pain, when millions were torn from their land, the tragedy of slavery forced a migration of bodies, but, ironically, ensured the survival of the African soul through the diaspora. The spiritual seeds traveled in silence and memory, crossing the ocean on slave ships, an act of mystical resistance amidst dehumanization. The great mystery of the diaspora is how the Orishas and Vodans managed to adapt and survive in a hostile and completely new environment, mixing with the Catholicism of the colonizers to create secret codes of communication and disguised forms of worship. This practice, known as syncretism, was not surrender. It was a strategy of spiritual and cultural camouflage. Think about it. The names were changed, the saints replaced the deities in the images, but the essence of the ritual, the rhythm of the drums, and the connection with the elements remained intact, a priceless treasure that stayed alive in the hearts and dances of the enslaved. This was the true prophecy of the ancestors, that the spirit would never die. What has been hidden about this journey is the transformative power of this knowledge. It not only survived, but regenerated and became the basis for the creation of new cultural identities in the Americas, a beacon of strength and resilience that shaped the faith of millions. And it is in these new lands, in the encrypted codes of the cults, that ancestral African knowledge has found a new stage to manifest itself and resist being forgotten. In the Americas, ancestral African spirituality not only survived but flourished in complex systems such as Candomblé in Brazil and Santeria in Cuba, transforming into living sanctuaries where the codes of the Orishas and Vodans were meticulously preserved. These terreiros, religious centers, and casas de santo, houses of worship, are not merely places of worship. They are libraries of oral wisdom, resisting erasure. The mystery of these codes lies in their double layer of meaning. Outwardly, they appear to venerate Catholic saints, but inwardly, the essence of African gods and their complex rituals are fervently preserved, a cultural cryptography that deceived the oppressor and protected the knowledge. What seems simple is, in fact, an advanced theological system. The priests and priestesses act as the modern guardians of this knowledge, mastering the language of drums, herbs, and cowrie shells, keeping alive the flame of Ma'at and the cosmogony of Nun. What manifests there is the profound memory of Kemet and the ancient spiritual routes of West Africa, carried through time. What has been hidden about Candomblé and Santeria is that they are living proof of African persistence, revealing that spirituality cannot be destroyed by decree or violence, and serve as a moral and identity compass for the diaspora. This is a force that refuses to be forgotten. This reemergence and resistance of ancestral knowledge brings the promise that historical truth cannot be hidden forever, and the sands of time are beginning to reveal new material evidence. Beneath the sands and forests, modern archaeology acts as a silent witness, gradually revealing material evidence that challenges official history and forces a redefinition of who we were. Excavations in Kush, Great Zimbabwe, and other regions not only uncover ruins but also unearth the technological and spiritual sophistication that the Western narrative has attempted to erase. The mystery lies not in the artifacts themselves, but in the academic resistance to accepting the dating and advancement of these civilizations, often predating their European counterparts, proving that African science was far ahead in astronomy, metallurgy, and architecture. The findings reveal that Africa was a network of innovation, not an isolated continent. Consider the pyramids of Meroe, smaller but more numerous than those of Giza, or the complex structures of wrought metal that indicate a mastery of technology that would only be achieved in Europe centuries later. These discoveries are a silent cry proving that Africa was, in fact, the school of the world, and not its late pupil. What is hidden is the fear of this revelation, the truth that the foundation of many modern human achievements has roots in African territories that have been conveniently marginalized and forgotten. History doesn't need to be rewritten, it just needs its African pages restored and read. This rediscovery of a past of justice and order leads us to question how these ancestral principles can and should be applied to face the challenges of today's world. The current world, marked by chaos, inequality, and ecological imbalance, cries out for an ethical anchor, and it is in this context that we are witnessing the reemergence of Ma'at consciousness in the 21st century. The ancient African concept of truth, justice, and cosmic harmony is resurfacing not only in temples, but also in the streets and in the speeches of social movements seeking a more just and balanced order for the planet. The great mystery is how a principle formulated millennia ago in Kemet continues to be the most accurate answer to modern challenges. For Ma'at teaches that the oppression and destruction of nature are fundamentally cosmic imbalances that need to be corrected. This is a philosophy that transcends politics and reaches the realm of the soul. We see this principle at work in the fight for human rights, in the pursuit of sustainability, and in the critique of rampant exploitation, proving that ancestral African knowledge is a perennial source of practical wisdom for global survival. It is not about reclaiming the past out of nostalgia, but out of existential necessity in the present. What has been concealed is that this philosophy of Ma'at offers a radical alternative to the individualism and greed that govern much of the modern world, inviting a profound reconnection with the rhythm of life and collective well-being. It is a call to reinstate order in a world that has lost its center. This powerful connection to justice and truth leads us directly to the search for identity and the awakening of a new strength, guided by the echoes of ancestry. In the whirlwind of the modern world, for millions of people in the diaspora and on the continent, spirituality has become identity, an act of reaffirmation and empowerment guided by the voice of the ancestors. The recovery of the cosmogonies of Nun, the Orishas, and the Vodans is much more than a religious choice. It is a search for lost roots, a reunion with one's own essence. The mystery lies in the unbreakable strength of this connection. Even after centuries of oppression and attempts at cultural erasure, faith in ancestors and African deities continues to be the mainstay of resilience, offering a sense of belonging and a history of dignity and power. The bond of blood and spirit has never been broken. This rediscovery serves as a beacon of cultural resistance, restoring self-esteem and the understanding that personal history is linked to a millennia-old lineage of wisdom and strength. Knowing that your people were at the forefront of civilization is an invaluable moral compass. What has been concealed is that the return to this ancestral spirituality is not a regression, but an evolutionary leap in consciousness, allowing individuals to understand their role in the cycle of Ma'at and the responsibility of carrying this legacy forward. It is the secret history that manifests itself in everyday life. This profound truth, which dwells in hearts and rituals, also subtly hides, camouflaged in the very language and symbols we use daily, without us even realizing its origin. Despite all efforts to erase the source, the hidden truth of ancestral African knowledge stubbornly manifests itself, camouflaged in elements of modern language and symbols that we use without realizing it. It is not merely a matter of words that have migrated, but of thought structures and symbolic concepts that have taken root in global culture, like silent echoes of Kemet and West Africa. The mystery lies in the persistence of these codes. Some oath rituals, concepts of justice, or even certain modern architectural structures retain a matrix of African origin, adapted and secularized over time. It is as if the memory of the continent were imprinted on the collective unconscious of humanity. Consider the rhythmic and spiritual influence of African music, which is not merely entertainment, but an ancestral form of communication that has become the foundation of almost every modern musical genre, from jazz to blues and beyond. The drumbeat is the pulse of Nun, manifesting itself in the 21st century. What has been obscured is that, to understand the depth of many current traditions, be they religious, artistic, or philosophical, it is necessary to return to the African source, recognizing that the path of wisdom did not follow a linear Eurocentric route, but rather the spiritual paths of the great continent. This discreet yet vital presence forces us to a final reflection on our own blindness and on what the world has truly lost by turning its back on its original spiritual center. We have reached the end of our journey, but the story of Africa, the spiritual center of the world, does not end here. This is, in fact, the invitation to return, a profound reflection on what the world has lost by forgetting, or worse, deliberately erasing, the ethical and spiritual roots of the continent that gave us life and law. The ultimate mystery is personal. What if the solution to the chaos and imbalance of our era is encoded in the principles of Ma'at, in respect for ancestors, and in the understanding that we are all part of the primordial waters of none. What we have lost is the compass, the map to harmony. This revelation is not about converting to a new faith, but about restoring respect for a source of wisdom that offered the world the concept of universal justice and the soul's journey towards eternity. The African legacy is our collective heritage, whether we want to accept it or not. What is hidden is that, by reopening these pages of history, we empower ourselves, gaining the clarity that no knowledge can be destroyed forever, only dormant, waiting for the time to be awakened again by curiosity and reverence. May the echo of this truth resonate within you, awakening a thirst to know more about the next revelations that lie dormant beneath the sands, waiting for the veil to be lifted once more.